Thank you very much for that introduction. It's nice to see you all in 3D. It's been quite a while. I've seen some of you on the screen. I do work in the area of business ethics. I have an interest in climate change, and the talk that I'm going to give today is about the divest movement and its role in climate change. It's titled Failing Forward, which entails persisting amid small setbacks. I'm a Clevelander. I'm a Cleveland sports fan. And so I'm very well prepared to talk about persisting amidst small failures. Now, in terms of the divest movement, however, there's this quandary, because many people would say, no, the way to influence fossil fuel companies is through engagement, as opposed to divestiture. And in essence, this is an exit and voice type of a quandary. If you have a relationship with an organization and you're displeased, then exit is an option. You leave the relationship. On the other hand, you might stay with the organization and attempt to bring about positive change, the voice option. And that's where we are in terms of climate change and influencing fossil fuel companies with divestment versus engagement. So let's look at both of these a little bit more closely. First, divestment. The objective of the divest movement is to revoke the social license of the fossil fuel industry and create financial pressure by doing so. This movement started scarcely 10 years ago. There were about 50, 60 different organizations, $55 billion under management. And now we have over 1,100 organizations and $40 trillion under management. And so that growth is roughly 700-fold. There's been uptake, and mostly led by faith-based institutions, education, pension fund, and government. And these organizations would agree or commit to divest in large measure from oil, from coal, and from companies that extract these chemicals. Outside of that, they would also commit to 5% of their investment portfolio into alternative energies, increasing to 10% by 2035. And they would commit to becoming net zero carbon by 2050. Loyola itself, just in the fall, committed to divest of fossil fuels in its endowment. So this movement has uptake, all very positive in terms of growth. Let's look at the engagement side. $4 trillion in the last 5 or 6 years in terms of funding fossil fuel companies. Significant. The engagement group would say you have to stay connected. If you sell your shares, then you lose your seat at the table. And given efficient markets, the parties that buy your shares, they may not care as much about the climate as you do. So hold on to the share. Given that, then, the majority of the 150 largest finance companies do not have policies regarding whether they finance fossil fuel companies or not. They continue to do so. And what we found is that the companies that finance the least, they have strong fossil fuel policies. Those that finance the most, they have weak fossil fuel policies. And so the likelihood is that fossil fuel companies are going nowhere. The demand for oil remains robust. And so this argument of engagement is a viable argument. There are good reasons for it. And so this leaves us with this dichotomy of invest or engage. But I think it's more useful to think in terms of paradox. I mean, a paradox exists where you have two contradictory elements that are yet interrelated. And I would argue that fossil fuels and engagement have a symbiotic type of relationship. Think of it this way. If you negotiate with a party and they know that you will not exit for any reason, how much more is your engagement weakened by the fact that they know that you will stay? I mean, the essence of divestment is credible threat. A credible threat exists if a credible threat is going to exist, then when a condition arises when the threat should be executed, the threat must be executed. And so divestment provides for engagement this credible threat. And by doing so, strengthens the engagement movement and makes engagement more substantive. So to the extent that the divest movement is failing, I would argue on that basis that it's failing forward. And it looks something like this. You have divestment on one end, it's saying get rid of fossil fuels. On the other end, you have engagement. But the divest movement is saying, outside of some substantive types of measures, this engagement looks like business as usual. It's greenwashing. And so we also have, interestingly, these different types of engagement now that are more aggressive, less passive. Consider activist investors. There's a firm called Engine Number One. You probably haven't heard of it. Small firm, 22 employees, West Coast, 250 million under management. Not very much, but they bought shares in Exxon. And they forwarded a shareholder motion and convinced BlackRock, 10 trillion under management, and State Street Bank, 4 trillion under management, to vote with them. They replaced 25% of Exxon's board with what they considered to be more responsible leadership. The argument was that Exxon's behavior around fossil fuels was putting its investors at unnecessary risk. I know one of the general managers, I was talking with him, and he said, Engine Number One won't save the world, but our example might. Engine Number One was named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential companies just this past March. Similarly, we have alternative pressures from finance organizations. Chase Bank has partnered with Cambridge University to counsel those they lend money to on the benefits of a fossil fuel future, of a fossil fuel-free future, and how to report more consistently and honestly on their behavior. Now, the researcher in me knows or was taught at Ohio State University that correlation does not equal causation. But still, you'd have to look at this and note that there's some relationship or feel that there's a possibility of it. And this is how I think it works. No business as usual. You need to divest. No, we won't do that. We'll do this instead. As though doing this instead is not related to the request to divest. And then there's some feeling of progress. See, this is better. Because the CEOs are not just sitting around doing nothing and they're totally invested or they're totally divested. They're reading, they're observing. And so the impact is not as direct as divest would have it be. It's indirect. It occurs through effects on other involved parties, such that you have an iterative process. Students, they're so forthcoming. I like to quote them whenever possible. And this is a student at the University of Sussex. And the whole point, and a lot of people's ability or perception of their ability to do anything about climate change is completely constrained by the notion that it's too big, it's too global, it's too abstract. After talking about it for such a long time, it's good to know that there are practical things that you might do in a reasonable amount of time. Divestment allows ordinary people to get involved in a big global issue. Something that they would not normally do because they're not buying stocks and bonds. They're involved through their associations, through their universities, through their memberships. You recall that the biggest divest groups, education, faith-based, pension, these are organizations that ordinary people can be involved in. So when people feel that they have some agency, they're much more likely to act. And in terms of the fossil fuel climate, the issue is so critically important that we need all hands on deck. I've elaborated these issues in the Journal of Business Ethics. It's an interest and concern of mine, and I hope you find the ideas helpful. Thank you.